This is Entrepreneurs Get Visible, the podcast for people who want more impact, influence, and income. I'm Anna Parker-Naples, and I'll be sharing with you proven methods from leading entrepreneurs that help you get visible as an authority in your field. Because anything's possible when you get visible. Podcasting is booming right now, and you might well be thinking, after listening to my episode, why you should start a podcast, that you actually do want to get going with this. And this is one of my areas of expertise, how you can create great audio to position yourself as an authority. So how do you get started in podcasting? If you're wanting to get your own show out there, to build loyalty, to build credibility, where do you start? So this is going to be a whistle-stop tour through everything I think you need to think about. But the main thing I'm going to tell you is that you want to get my checklist so that you're not just launching a podcast and getting it out there, you're doing it with impact. And you can find that checklist at annaparkernaples.co.uk/podcast checklist. So the first thing you need to do is really stop and think about who is your podcast for. What are they looking for? What content are they wanting? What problems am I going to be helping them with? And then go and do your research. Find other shows in your niche. Find other authors in your niche. Find other people within your field that are running similar podcasts so you understand where you're going to fit in the marketplace. Second of all, you need to understand about recording equipment and a recording space. You do need a semi-decent microphone, but it doesn't have to cost the earth. There are recommendations coming your way. A few days after you sign up for my podcast checklist, you'll get all of my equipment recommendations for all sorts of different budgets. I'm a big believer it doesn't have to be complicated, but the audio does have to sound good in the first place. The other thing connected with that equipment is that you need to have a good recording space. So this means something that's not noisy, something where the noise doesn't reverberate, preferably with carpeted room, preferably with something where there's not lots of external noise, trains nearby or aeroplanes going overhead. So you're thinking about the environment you're recording your end of the audio in. The next thing then is to think about the branding for your podcast. Think about the intros and outros. Will you have a voiceover or will it just be music? If you're going to use a voiceover, will you pay a professional to do that, or do you want it to be your own voice? There are various reasons why people choose either one of those. The next thing then is the music. What music are you going to use, and can you get the right license for it? That's very important. How big do you intend your show to be? If you think about where your show is aiming to get, you might need to get a slightly different, more expensive license for your music. One of the places that I'd recommend starting to have a look is on audiojungle.net. Have a look at them and see what they've got to offer, but make sure you get a license that is going to work for your growth. The next thing then is to think about how are you going to record and edit this? So you've got the equipment, but where are you actually going to be recording it into? So this could be your editing software, perhaps something like Audacity, which is free, or if you were always going to be having guests, you might want to use Zoom or something like Zencaster to record your audio online. Then you want to think about how am I going to edit it? So again, Audacity is a free system that I recommend. Another great one is Twisted Wave, which is one of my personal favorites, having had 15 years experience in audio. Super simple to use. I really think it's worth looking at. And once you've got that, and once you've edited it together, are you then going to want to edit every show, or are you going to want to outsource? So it's easy to find talented, capable outsourcers who are brilliant audio editors who can make your audio just sound amazing. If you want to outsource that, you can get in touch with my team. That's something we specialise in, helping you put all of your podcasts together to make sure that it's crystal clear audio. So if that's something you're interested in, make sure you get in touch with me and we will put you in touch with our production team. The next thing then, where are you going to host your podcast? So places that you might have heard of are Libsyn, Podbean's quite popular right now, and also lots of people are starting to use Anchor. I would do your research around this because there are some podcast platforms where it is free to host your material. However, long term, you don't then have ownership of your audio, and those facilities could put adverts on that don't suit your audience that you have no control over whatsoever. So before you go with something free, do your research. I highly recommend Libsyn, and if you want to know more about that, then there should be some information in my show notes coming out as soon as this podcast is live. Then I want you to think about, am I interviewing guests or aren't I? Is this a solo show or not? And that is going to mean that you have to give consideration to the level of content, the regularity of content that you're giving, how much notice and time do you need to liaise with guests, to find guests, to book them into your calendar and get all of those processes in place. How are you going to find your guests once you've exhausted your immediate network? And how are you going to make sure that you are getting the best from those guests? What kind of questions are you going to ask? What do you need to give them in the first place to make sure that they're comfortable and understand your show? Finally, then, it's thinking about submitting to your directories. So this would be, once you've hosted it, how are you then getting it onto iTunes? How are you getting it onto Spotify and to Stitcher? There are so many, hundreds and hundreds of podcast platforms, podcast directories that you can get yourself into, and many of them are free. So it's thinking about strategically, have I got time to be uploading to these places? Can the host platform push it out for me? I think that's a really big requirement in the first place. What's going to be that ease with getting my message out to the masses as much as I possibly can? And then finally, it's about your show notes. So your show notes are essentially the blog version or a condensed version, giving all sorts of resources to your listeners, which can then go on to not only where your podcast is hosted and onto those directories, but onto your website itself. So this carries the potential for lots of SEO, lots of search engine optimization, which we all know is brilliant for gaining authority on Google. And you then are building your own website to be useful for you because of the podcast that you are creating. And finally, the thing that I want to mention is that you don't just want a podcast. You want one that works with impact, that is going to be successful for your business. So before you get your podcast out there, you want to make sure that you have a solid launch strategy, which is probably going to take you about a month at least to make sure that you are giving yourself the best chance to rise through those ranks on iTunes, get the listeners, get the downloads, get the reviews, so that you have a really credible podcast that you are proud of, that showcases you, your credibility and your business. So that's it from me. Just to wrap up, how to get started in podcasting. Make sure you do your research. Don't just do it willy-nilly. Make sure you have great equipment, that you understand what that's all about, and that you're using a great, quiet recording space. Get some good editing software. Some are free, some are paid. Do your research. Decide on what your branding is going to be like, from your artwork to your intros, to your outros, to your music. Make sure there is some consistency in the energy and the style of your podcast, that it's clear what it's about. Consider outsourcing if you are not au fait with editing, if this is something that scares you, if it's something that's going to put you off. Make sure that you choose your hosting platform for your podcast carefully so that you make sure you own the material yourself. Connect with great guests. Make sure that that becomes a regular part of your business so that you're making the podcast and the potential collaborations work for you. Make sure you submit to as many directories as you possibly can, and create excellent show notes so that your launch is as effective as possible, so that your podcast makes impact. And so to repeat, if you do want to check out my podcast checklist, which is how to launch with impact, it is a 22-step guide on everything I think you need to know, which is what helped me get my podcast to number 3 in the UK charts and number 9 globally for business, knocking off many of the top spots like Tony Robbins and Gary Vee. If you want to know how I did that, make sure you're on my checklist. You can get that at annaparkernaples.co.uk/podcast checklist. Thank you for listening to Entrepreneurs Get Visible. To get your free checklist on how to raise your profile and to find out about our community, go to annaparkernaples.co.uk/get visible.